Hi everyone, this is group 12. Your speakers are Fatima, Tyler, and Chloe. We're going to be analyzing the research report Asian Americans and American Politics from Discrimination to Participation by Ms. Fulgado. The barriers to political participation for Asian Americans. In Fulgado's research report, she points out that New York has the nation's second largest Asian population, standing at 800,000, and that there has never been an Asian American elected to citywide, statewide, or national office. This is a concerning matter because a lack of representation could mean that their needs and interests may not be fully considered in government decisions. She brings up the model minority myth and how it continues to obscure the barriers Asian Americans face, such as language difficulties, discrimination, and lack of resources. Racial discrimination is a significant barrier to political participation. These barriers can affect Asian American candidates and voters from participating effectively. This supports her earlier claim on how the community's political strength has yet to be fully realized. Moving on to Kitano and Daniel, who studied Asian Americans as an emerging minority. They created the term pluralistic model, which means one can be fully American while still maintaining a strong ethnic ties/identity. Ms. Fulgado mentions that these terms are not static, and a person's view can change as the United States is constantly changing socially and politically.
Hi, this is Chloe, and my section will be covering paragraphs 5 through 10. And this is basically the section where the author's talking about how Asian Americans can get stuck between being called the model minority and the forgotten minority. And we've already talked about this a lot in class, but just to go over it again, the model minority myth makes it seem like Asian Americans are all successful, educated, financially stable, and because of that, people assume Asian communities don't need help and don't face any discrimination. But it's really the opposite. And the reading makes this point, that this stereotype actually blocks political power. If everyone thinks you're fine, no one thinks you need representation. So Asian Americans can get praised culturally, but they're still kept out of these political spaces and unheard. And then the article connects this to something that we've also talked about pretty often in discussion, and that is the perpetual foreigner stereotype. And it's like, even when Asian Americans are born here generations deep, people will still see them as not fully American. And the reading straight up says that Asians were historically viewed as unassimilable, which, although I think is crazy, we can see it playing out in our politics today. And like the New York City example, there's this massive Asian population, but basically no Asian representation in the major offices. And that's exactly what the author calls the forgotten minority dynamic. There's just a ton of people, but the political system somehow does not see them. And this part also ties into this idea of pan-ethnicity. The term Asian American didn't just appear naturally, it's been created by institutions and government categories. And because all these different groups get lumped together, it hides our differences between like Korean Americans, Filipino Americans, Vietnamese Americans, etc. They all have different histories and political needs, but the model minority myth just flattens them into one successful category and group. And what that does is it erases all the real issues, like poverty, language access, and immigration status, that some of the groups struggle with more than the others. And when those issues do get erased, they don't get any political attention. Overall, my section of paragraphs 5 through 10 basically explains how these stereotypes end up limiting our political empowerment. It fits this whole racial triangulation framework from our class. It's that Asian Americans get culturally praised but politically excluded. They're like good immigrants but not seen as full participants. And that also makes coalition building that much harder. Because if other groups think Asians are privileged or doing fine, it creates this distance instead of any solidarity or community or support. So I would say the big takeaway is these stereotypes don't just hurt people socially, they actually shape who gets political voice and who doesn't.
My name is Tyler, and I'll be taking care of the next 6 slides coming up. So first, it's historical discrimination, which is when, like, the early Asian American immigrants were labeled as unassimilable, which meant that they couldn't fit into the American society, which caused them to face more discrimination and racism. This led to the anti-Asian law, which was called the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which banned Chinese immigrants, and later in 1917, 1924, expanded to where almost all Asians were banned. And then Asians were also denied citizenship, which meant they couldn't vote or have political voices until mid-1900s. For the next slide, it's legal and political barriers. And the barriers were, like, the government had naturalization laws, which blocked Asians from acquiring citizenship. And that also made the immigration police policies target Asian countries and limit how many people could come in. The state laws added more discrimination against Asians because of the ineligibility to become citizenships, as that made them allow to make more reasons to pass unfair laws about property, jobs, or rights. And all this made it very hard for Asian Americans to participate in politics. And for the next one is the turning point in 1960, which was during the 1960s, which is for the civil rights movement, which the movement was basically about exposing racism across countries and also inspired Asian Americans, like students or people that were younger, to come together and take action. And this is also known as the Asian American movement. New laws that also helped was the 1965 Immigration Act that put an end to racist immigration quotas and allowed more Asians to come to the U.S. And then the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Acts protected people from discrimination in voting, school, jobs, and public places. And then for the next one is political participation today. So I feel like in like modern day, Asian American population is growing really fast. Like in New York, there's quite a bit. And then Asian Americans, like when they register to vote, they can vote with very high rates, which is about 76% during 1994, which was the highest voters that turned out among any other groups. The biggest problem is the lower voter registration, such as many Asian Americans that are able to register, like to vote, are not registering, which limits the political power of communities. And for next one is ongoing challenges. So many ongoing challenges is like how Asian American are like wrongly accused, or not wrongly accused, but they're asked to show IDs and find names missing on their voters list that were probably removed or were used to use paper ballot or forced to use paper ballots. And then another challenge I feel like is language barriers, such as like if it's really hard for some Asian Americans to learn how to speak English, and their accents make it really hard for others to understand them. And then for lastly, I feel like stereotypes, such as being seen as a model minority or like the silent minority, such as being every Asian is seen as like very smart and knows what they're doing and hardworking, which could build a very strong like pressure. And then for the last slide is a path to empowerment, which I feel like could be to build more political power, such as increasing voter registration and raise awareness about civic participation. And I think it's also right to like educate people about the issue and how important it is. Another one I feel like is like making like connecting communities together, such as volunteering or joining campaigns to help strengthen political influence. And in conclusion, I feel like Asian Americans in the US have moved up from like dealing with discrimination and exclusion in politics. They have started to grow more in participating as a community and have more political influence, which I feel like could continue helping Asian American communities play a more powerful and important role in the future of American politics.